my original design philosophy for 1.0 was I had the metal stat, which was kind of like using was measuring the quality, the overall quality of a miniature, and that was supposed to be like charisma, intelligence, dexterity, so agility. And my thought is that you've got your grunts who are like your average guys, right? And their chance to figure something out or move a rock was about 50% of the time. So that was a metal stat of 5 for D10 plus 5, 10 or higher. And that was my thinking. And then anybody exceptionally smart or dumb or weak, you would just give like a special an ability like coward, like -2 to tests for morale and stuff like that, or like -2 to strength tests. But then when I was like over years of playing, I realized that was kind of limiting. And ultimately, when you start adding skills in, it's just another stat anyway. So I decided to pull those stats out. So those, in theory, stats have always been there. They were just kind of hidden behind the curtains of mechanics a little bit. So I pulled them out. Now, as most war games revolve around fighting, so I didn't really. You won't see a huge amount of difference between the way combat works with the stats, because mostly I just pulled out like strength and melee have always been separate stats, but now we have intelligence, agility, and I know I'm missing one, are now completely separated stats. I did try to come out with new rules for like weapons and combat abilities that will let you use intelligence and agility more, and those stats are a little just more important. So you'll see a little bit of like mechanical flexing for that. But I would say the answer to your question is the new stats aren't as scary as you should. In fact, you could probably modify your old stuff just very easily. Like I know people have been talking about can the old supplements work? And I say, well, there are new stats. So you just kind of need to like figure out where that model should be stat wise, and it's mostly 5s anyway. Occasionally a 4 for intelligence, but you won't see. I guess the answer to the question is you won't see a huge difference with the new stats and the way combat works under the new rules. Because the rules, while they are updated, are still mostly like it's still TNT under the hood, so the old supplements mechanically mostly still work. It's just the big one is any skills that may have gotten changed significantly, or I kind of we tweaked the crap out of weapons a lot, so there's some balancing there. I got to look at the supplements, but I think we could easily come out with like, so if stat blocks for the mutant cannibals, right? That's just a matter of putting those out. This is what the stat should be. All the rules and everything else we're not going to change at the moment. I know when people ask that question, they're really asking about robots.
It's across the board. That's just the supplement people want to know.
That's really what people are like. I want to play my robots, and I'm like, oh, the robots are really changed a lot in the new rules a little bit. So, but I think what we can do is I will take some time and I will publish new stat blocks for every supplemental warband, and then we can put those out for free. It just in that way that'll get people going, and you'll kind of have to play. I can't say for balance, but like because like especially like the robots, I really want to get under the hood how they work again. They I want to do not like huge changes, but I definitely want to play with them some.
Gotcha.
So that's like it's just not a simple of like I don't want a simple port of the robot rules. I want to be like, all right, let's really look at them, how they work, and everything else. So, but we can we can come up with something quick. Here's updated stats for everything because that's really simple. That's just me making a decision on how smart a robot should be. Yeah. So, like, I could easily do that, and we could just put that out.
Yeah, that should be pretty straightforward. I think the good thing is like with the second edition, it is a really good chance for you to revisit things in more of an in-depth way. So like you said, it's not really just a case of like, oh yeah, just put some extra number lines in and they're good to go. It's like you want to actually revisit this stuff properly, with a fresh approach. So
Absolutely. No and yes. No, there is no immediate plans for vehicles in the current rulebook. Vehicles are a challenge. I've been actually thinking about two different approaches to vehicles, and I think is one of the reasons I've been thinking about is combining vehicles in a new campaign book. And my thought process for this is, and this is something that, this is just me wish listing for the future, is that vehicles can work two different ways in a game. And I would love to have both approaches in a single rulebook. The first is the classic, you have a vehicle, it's on the board, it has stats, guys drive it, turn templates, the classic skirmish war game vehicle that's been around for 20 years. They're part of your warband, guys can ride inside them, they can go on and off the board. That's the part that's a little challenging playing with a 3x3 board. If I did them that way, I might increase the size of the board to encourage people to objectives are harder to get because you have to get there quickly, right?
Yeah.
And that would be one way to play. The second way to play is vehicles aren't necessarily, they're important, but they're not driving around on the field. These are, you imagine that you're in a movie, and if you're not, the vehicle comes onto the board and stops. And the vehicle becomes your deployment method for your warband, right? Everyone rolls in, everyone has to pile out of the car, and then that car is how you get off the board too, right? And the thought process I have is cars and parts are expensive. They don't make them anymore, right? So how much are you willing to, in this methodology, how long are you willing to let your car remain on the board?
Yeah.
It brings weapons, right? You can mount heavy weapons on the cars
right.
and shoot your pot, but are you willing to, drive in, drop it off, and pull away, and your car is not going to get damaged, and you don't have to find parts later? Are you going to stay on there peppering, the enemy? But if you lose, your windshield or your radiator gets blown up, that's some decisions you have to make. So those are two different campaign styles. And I also like the idea of vehicles being able to, you can have a bigger campaign map and really moving from place to place.
Mm-hmm.
So I really want to do, I have this whole, retro America, interstate, what's the famous 66? Route 66,
yeah.
right? Just traveling along the wasteland, vehicle rules kind of thing.
Yeah,
so that is in the back of my head. I do have vehicle rules written. They need to be play tested for the first type I had mentioned. I do need to tweak them a little bit. Who knows? Maybe we sell enough books. Maybe I'll let them loose in the world for people to take a look at.
Yeah, who knows?
Just an idea.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no rules for building vehicles, but you can look at how vehicles work. I've kind of softly written vehicles out of the rules because there's a thing called the Slag Maker, and it's inspired by ever read The Postman?
Yeah.
Not the movie, the book.
I've only seen the movie.
Yeah. Okay, so in the book and movie are completely two different animals.
I assume they are, yeah.
But in the book, they mention rogue satellites that nobody controls anymore, and they target things. So in my head canon, there's a Slag Maker floating above the Earth, and it's an old logistics targeting satellite that shoots lasers down on, and that's why you don't have vehicos anymore. You have vehicles, but that's why there's not highways and tanks and giant robots still being used because, technological signature detected. Here comes the laser beam.
Yeah, that's hilarious. That's cool.
So you have to really figure out am I going to risk my car and how much technology do I want to put on this car? A fission reactor will be great, no fuel needed. Increased chance of the Slag Maker coming on. Actually, when I was writing TNT 1 for the first time, I was actually thinking about vehicle rules, and you could have the tribals would steal computer chips and they would do soldering because they're anti-technology, but they would make things that would mimic higher levels of technology, and they would throw spears at vehicles and they would latch on and it would mimic the signature.
Then it would be targeted
to increase the chance of the Slag Maker coming
out. That's fun. I like that a lot.
I don't know how to make that work game-wise, but that was always the idea I had. I was like, oh yeah.
Some fun.
I think that's the thing. I think that's the thing that's cool though, is we are able to kind of it's not like we're wiping everything it's not like you wipe the entire slate clean, but this is a really good reset point for you and for
Yeah,
TNT.
mechanically, yes.
That's kind of like, I mean, the game's been out for a long time at this point, so it's not
10
like
years.
the second edition is, it's not like it's been 2 or 3 years or anything. So
No,
you
no.
have so much, like, that it's such a breadth of information and player feedback that you can now take into account going forward on like new content, and I think that's the really valuable thing that
Yep.
that I know that we're really keen to tap into as well, is like, taking that feedback and then really giving people what they actually want as opposed to like what, we think they want, So
No.
I think that's a really important thing.
I get this question a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm going to give my honest answer to this question because I know.
Please do.
I'm not gatekeeping at all on how people play games, and I know everybody's approach to game playing and the concept of fun is different. Ed, I've never been actually super interested in writing solo rules because to me, it's the spectacle of the diorama, the miniatures on the board, and that's like half of it. And then the other half is the human being you're playing against.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never felt confident in my ability to give a single player that level of competition. And I know there are flow charts and model reaction, and there are ways of doing it. But I in my head, I've never gone more than like, it's kind of like where I see like you're playing chess, where I don't know why people just don't. So again, I'm not gatekeeping on this, but in my head, I've never understood why just play both sides, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to, if you're like, especially for a war band game where it's two equally pointed out sides, short of an unusual scenario where they're just going at each other, right? I don't know how I can give a acceptable, like, challenging. Now, for like scenario elements where there's a hidden agenda or there's hidden secrets or there's models who are moving mysteriously on the board that other players can't, that you don't want other players to control directly, then I start seeing the elements of, guy moves 6 inches. Is there an enemy within 12? He'll shoot. If not, he'll go into cover. Those kind of decision making trees. I get that. But so that's always been why there's never been hardcore solo rules. Now, there are some solo rules that were published that I did as a free giveaway. And the gentleman who gave them to me, I don't remember his name, they were pretty hardcore decision tree solo rules. And that was how he designed them. And I looked at them, I said, I didn't like verify that everything works. I'm like, okay, these look like they look functional. They look like they give the type of gameplay that this gentleman wanted to have. And I liked them, and I put them out for free. Now, I said I'm not going to change these.
Yeah.
Sadly, when they were publishing, the decision trees were very big, so we had to make them small, so they're a little hard to read in a PDF.
Right.
And I know they're like, when I think of like how I want to play solo rules, it's usually a cooperative with another person, or it's like a Rangers of the Shadow Deep, or 5 parsecs from home kind of situation where there's the element of discovery. Is it really where the solo kicks in, right? Where it's like, the game is revealing itself versus I'm trying to come up with some type of transcript to determine the behavior of a model based on available game data. The game state.
Right.
And that's always, I've never felt confident in my ability to do it, coupled with I'm not 100% interested in doing it just from how I like to write and play. So that's why this is where I'm like, if somebody who is super excited wants to help with that, I have no problem with collaborating with somebody who really wants to work on solo rules.
Yeah, no, I think that's a super honest and really valid answer to that question, and I think this is something that we get asked all the time, and there's some, I think, incredible writers out there that write really compelling solo games, but I think that in some ways, Connor and I often approach this from a really similar perspective. Connor's currently doing all the development work on the Lunar Solo, and it's like anytime I am looking at solo rules, what I'm actually looking for is co-op rules, to where I can play with a friend doing something. You know, what you're really writing is a whole different set of rules and mechanics. And it's like, will the game engine actually lend itself to it? Some games you can develop solo really easily because they're developed kind of from the ground up. Don't Look Back is a great example of that, where the game is designed to be played cooperatively, but there's no reason why, due to how the game functions mechanically, that you can't just play it solo. And I think that's just like kind of an element that often people miss, is like, was the game developed from the ground up to be solo playable, or is it something that has to be added on as another element? So it sometimes requires a lot of development work to do.
I think also model count really determines things. Like TNT, you've got 8 to 12 models on the board.
Right.
That's really hard. Where I think like Lunar, like 3 to 5, you can really go in and get a little more granular.
It was really only recently that you kind of put forward that idea, Connor, where you're like, this is how we could do solo. Because again, Connor and I had honestly the exact same thought process than I think you did, Joey, where it's like, if you want to play solo, like, just play both sides. I mean, that's kind of how the game operates. You'll still have random elements because you're still rolling dice and stuff. But, yeah, I think when it comes to solo, it's like there really has to be some type of concept beyond like the original game's function that can kind of drive it, and that's not always easy when you're developing games to kind of come up with. So, yeah, honestly, I think that's a super honest answer, and I think people will appreciate that for sure.
So poison and flame, the flammable rule is what it's called, are kind of classic additions. I don't like tokens on the board a lot, so I tend to avoid things that last more than one turn.
Mm-hmm.
So, but like poison and flammable is like one of those things. I'm like, they're kind of classics and you need them. So they've always been part of TNT. And so when I started the rules review, I made a ton of changes to how both of these work. And then we did playtesting some more, and I made more changes, and then we kind of came back to our stuff.
Sometimes that's how it goes.
They're like, we're happy. So I will read you right now, as of the current document. For poison, any model hit by a weapon with a poison special rule must take a survival test during the next cleanup phase. If the model fails, it suffers a D6 strength hit. That is literally how it worked in the last edition. I played around with, like, they got -1 to toughness, or they would like lose stuff, like they're, like -2 for multiple turns, and then people are like, it just wasn't as good as it used to be. So I was like, fine, you know what? That's what we're sticking with. You guys, I hope you're happy.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
Flammable, same situation. It's a little different now. I will read how flammable works. Any model. Okay, so when this ability hits any model hit by a weapon with a flammable rule must take an agility test during the cleanup phase during the game, during the end of the game turn. If the model fails, so it's worded a little differently. If the model fails, it gains the fire token. So basically, you put a token on that model. A model with a fire token suffers a -2 to all stats and dice rolls. Dude's on fire, right? So,
but you have to make an agility test. So if you do not stop, drop, and roll fast enough, you are on fire.
Right. So the reason why I have so the way flammable used to work was it was almost the same as a poison test, except you would roll agility instead of survival. It was, like it's dodging out of the way. The flame kissed you a little bit, but you got out of the way. You could pat yourself off. I wanted to play with. There was a lot of really fun play space with because I'd been thinking about the Borderlands game and there's people on fire in that game, and there's like a cult of fire and psychos that are on fire, and it powers them. And I was just like, and I've always wanted to do a raid or a cult of the fire at some point in time, is in like my goal. I'm like, I need some way mechanically that it's more interesting than just you're on fire, you take a thing, and if you don't, you take a D6 strength hit. So now there's a fire token that stays on that model for the next turn. So that model so basically the model is essentially on fire and is very distracted. So -2 to all tests except for defense rolls, because you being distracted doesn't mean you're actually you don't burn faster because you're distracted.
Right.
Essentially. Okay. So at the end of its next activation, remove the fire token and the affected model suffers an automatic strength 6 hit. So if they don't do anything, they're going to take a pretty hard hit.
Yeah.
At the start of this activation, a model with a fire token may spend 1 AP to basically drop prone or remove the fire token, reverting to stop, drop, and roll.
Yeah.
So it's a little more complicated, just slightly bit, but I really like that design space where you're going to make a decision about whether or not you want to stay on fire or not.
Right.
So I just love the fact of I can have raiders that are every turn they're on fire, their defense goes down by 1 as the flame consumes them, but they get stronger and they're they're running forward.
That's super
I don't know.
fun. It gives you a bit more room to play with. You know? Yeah.
But I don't feel like it added. I mean, we really play tested the crap out of this rule, and because people are like, flamers are really good now, and I'm like, yeah, I kind of like flamers being really good now. Because the big difference in TNT now is the scope of the game is tighter. There's a smaller board. Weapon ranges have gone down slightly. Melee is more dangerous.
Right.
So I like when everything's condensed more into the core gameplay loop. Flamers are good. It's just like under the old rules, they were really good for you might just being able to hit a couple of models, right? That if you got lucky, right?
Yeah.
And also you didn't roll to hit. That was a really nice. That was the big take. That was the big thing that Flamer did. But now I'm like, it really brings area control in more.
Mm-hmm.
So I really just keep off that objective.
Yeah.
I've had more than one playtest game where I just hit a guy behind a building with the flamer and the guy forgot about him. I'm like, I'm not going to remind you he's there. You can walk around the port and look at any time. There's no information.
That's awesome.
But I'm not going to do you any favors, Chad.
And
my playtester is my friend Chad, and he has suffered more than one flamer hit in his time.
Sometimes it's okay to make a weapon good, especially in
so it's why I like
games.
It's like why I like teasing Ben about the really cool models that he did for the was it the caravanners?
Oh,
the caravan regard.
Oh,
the guy that has the highest to hit, and he came a flamer. But I'm just but the flamer is really good, so that's actually a decision that guy might have made.
Yeah,
it's okay.
Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah. Also, it's a really badass model. So
old TV head, man.
I love that. This should be there really should be a. I don't know. I went to this thing called Neotropolis. It's like Wasteland Weekend. Have you ever
I
heard
remember
of that?
when you went to that, yeah.
But it's for Cyberpunk.
Yeah.
And they had this thing called the Cult of 1984. And it's literally a cult, and they've got this holy book. It's this all scrapbook of the who were the rats? The brats. The actors from that time. And they just had this holy book. Yeah. And I'm just and Max Headroom is a god, and I'm just
it's fun.
Just guys with TV heads, that'd be such a cool thing. Just a TV, a cult of the 80s. Oh. Sorry, this is what I get excited about. Just
it's
okay.
Well, there is a few questions, and you'll be able to go a little bit more.
Okay,
down
next
that
question.
Rabbit hole.
Gameplay loop. What does your game do when it's doing it right? I'm old school. I am pushing late 40s. I'm older than most of you young kids. And when I entered wargaming, the size of a wargame table was determined by the size of a piece of plywood. 8x4. That's how big the board was. So everything was either 8x4 for big games, 6x4 for slightly smaller games, and then anything smaller was 4x4, right? So when I was in the design space 10 years ago for TNT, I was building the game as an homage and spiritual successor to those games that I grew up playing in the late 90s and early 2000s. That's what I loved, And back then you had longer range weapons. You had a turn or two of maneuvering, right? Of just getting to places. But then you see games changed, and you had other games coming in, and I was like, man, you really don't need that extra turn of just moving, right? It's just really nothing is happening. So, and then I saw other games just running well into 3x3, and as a smaller element to it, you need less terrain, right? So
Right.
you really have this interesting dichotomy of smaller table size means less terrain. You can play on more tables. You might have 3x3 could reasonably fit a coffee table, a big one, mind you, but you don't have to throw up this big, huge plank of wood on your kitchen table to play.
Yeah.
And it just shoves everybody into a box more, right? That's the interesting part of the war game is when the first shots are fired, and honestly, we just get there faster with a smaller table. If I ever have scenarios where I need more exploration or I need players to start further apart, we can always go to 4x4. It's not like this, like when I say TNT only ever runs on a 3x3, because that's not true. Especially if I do vehicles, hell, I might go to 4x6.
Yeah.
And force places to really maneuver around each other, right?
Yeah.
But for most games, I just really like the play space of 3x3. And I will also say one of my favorite things, and this is also I will tie in. This is why I like working with Black Site, a dedicated terrain company. Well, not dedicated 100%, but that's big push there.
What we do
Is that when you have the smaller your board goes, and this is especially true with 2x2 games, terrain becomes more important, right? It's like when you're playing a big game, you're like, okay, how much scatter do I have? How many big pieces do I have? But that's all generic, right? But when you're when you got a smaller board, I have this really kick-ass gas station, and I really want to I want to take pictures of my guys crawling over it, and that thing can go in the center, right?
Yeah.
Individual terrain pieces become more important narratively, right? And when I'm telling my headcanon stories, I'm like, it's just not like I have some line blocking terrain down, which is important mechanically to figure out. But I just get excited more about the terrain that goes down because it's I can focus more on more diorama pieces and pieces that really tell the story that I want to tell. So yeah, we really did go pretty hardcore into reducing the size, and the scenarios were changed. I did reduce I always told people really, if you want to play on a smaller board, just deploy to the table, deploy 6 inches in, right? That'll get you 85% of the way there for scenario balance. But I did write the new scenarios in the book, and the old scenarios were significantly tweaked for the smaller table size. And we ran every game through. We put the terrain on the board. We're like, okay, this feels right.
Because we would play on our lunch breaks at work.
Yeah.
And we had, how long was our break? 45 minutes or something? And so we kind of had this version of Necromunda that we would play that was a little bit truncated for us to be able to play comfortably in 45 minutes and kind of get a couple of rounds of combat in and have a bit of fun and just also relax and eat our lunch at the same time. And I think that's kind of where that kind of thought process came from for us. Yeah, I mean, I like 3x3s as well. I think it's a good size.
I mean, you could go smaller, and a lot of games work smaller, but I still feel I like terrain on the board. I like having a semi-big board, so I really feel like 3x3 is probably the right size for the game. Like Lunar, right? Perfect 2x2 game.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I've played games that are a foot. like Rumble Slam is this
Mhm.
wrestling game. That board is like this big, right? But it works perfectly.
Right.
So it depends on the game you're playing.